Back then, I was a different version of William. Broke, angry, convinced the world owed me something it had never promised. I'd just gone through a divorce, was drowning in debt, and felt invisible in a way that messes with your head. The crime I'm writing about wasn't my first bad decision, but it was the one that made me feel, for a brief, stupid moment, like I mattered. The object of it all was a rare car. Not just expensive, special. The kind of car you see once in your life and remember forever. I won't name the model because it still feels like poking a bruise, but if you know cars, you know the type: low, loud, and dripping with ego. I didn't need it. I didn't even really want it in a practical sense. What I wanted was the feeling of being in control, of having something no one thought I deserved. At the time, I told myself it was just a job, just another hustle. I had 1,000 justifications lined up. Insurance would cover it. The owner was rich anyway. I wasn't hurting anyone directly. Those lies were easy to believe when I was desperate and tired of feeling small. This is the story of how I stole that car, how I felt like king of the road for a few hours, and how reality, wearing a badge and flashing lights, eventually caught up with me. The thing people don't get about crimes like this is that most of it happens long before anything illegal actually does. The theft itself was maybe 20 minutes. The thinking? That took weeks. I'd seen the car a few times before I ever touched it. Same spot, same days, tucked away like a trophy behind a small private garage. I noticed patterns because that's what desperation does. You start paying attention to details you used to ignore. When the lights went on. When they went off. When the place was quiet enough that the city felt like it was holding its breath. I told myself I was just looking. Just curious. That's always the first lie. I didn't have some Ocean's 11 level setup. No crew, no slick tech. Just a notebook in my head and too much time alone with my thoughts. I rehearsed the steps over and over, not because I was confident, but because repetition made it feel less terrifying. I checked my watch constantly. I planned routes I might take if things went wrong. I even practiced my "nothing to see here" face in the mirror, which sounds ridiculous now but felt important then. Every night leading up to it, I slept like garbage. Half my brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea, the other half whispering that this was my chance to finally get ahead, even if just for a moment. I remember standing in my kitchen at 2 a.m., staring at my reflection in the microwave door, asking myself if this was really who I'd become. And then I packed what I thought I'd need, kept it minimal so it wouldn't look suspicious, and told myself that if I hesitated when the moment came, I'd walk away. That was the promise I made to myself. The night I decided to do it didn't feel dramatic. No thunder, no cinematic music swelling in the background. It was just quiet in that unsettling way, the kind where every sound feels louder because you're listening for trouble. I parked a few blocks away and walked the rest. I remember how aware I was of my own body, how my shoes sounded too loud on the pavement, how my breath felt shallow and fast. I kept thinking everyone could tell what I was about to do just by looking at me, like guilt had a smell. When I finally saw the car again, it looked unreal, like it didn't belong in the same world as me. Even sitting still, it had presence. I stood there longer than I should have, just staring at it, my heart banging away like it wanted out. Part of me hoped something would interrupt me, someone walking by, a noise, anything that would force me to leave and save me from myself. Nothing happened. That's the dangerous part of moments like that. When the world doesn't stop you, you start believing it's giving you permission. I moved closer, every step feeling heavier than the last. My hands were shaking, and I kept clenching and unclenching them to steady myself. I wasn't thinking about consequences then. I was thinking about how close I was, how after weeks of imagining this moment, it was actually here. I told myself, just get inside. You can still back out after that. Another lie, stacked neatly on top of the others. When I finally crossed that invisible line, when it went from planning to doing, I felt this rush, like stepping off a cliff and realizing you're not dead yet. Fear and excitement tangled together so tight I couldn't tell them apart. That was the moment everything changed, even if I didn't know it yet. I won't pretend it was smooth. Movies make it look effortless, like you just slide in and everything magically works. Reality was messier, louder, and way more nerve-wracking. Getting the door open felt like it took forever, even though it was probably seconds. Every tiny click sounded like an alarm in my head. I kept pausing, listening, waiting for someone to shout or a light to flick on. Nothing. Just my own pulse thudding in my ears. When I finally lowered myself into the driver's seat, it hit me all at once. The smell of the interior, leather and something sharp, almost electric. The way everything felt tight and precise, like the car was coiled and waiting. I remember thinking how wrong it felt that I was sitting there, like I'd snuck into someone else's dream. My hands hovered for a second before touching anything. That hesitation was the last real chance I had to stop. I could have stepped out, closed the door, walked away, and this would have just been another dark thought I was ashamed of. Instead, I took a breath and committed. When the engine came alive, it wasn't just sound, it was a presence. Deep, confident, almost arrogant. I swear I smiled without meaning to. Fear was still there, but adrenaline was starting to drown it out, flooding my system with this dangerous sense of power. I pulled out slow at first, forcing myself not to rush. That restraint felt like proof that I was in control, that I wasn't panicking. Inside, though, my thoughts were racing. Don't screw this up. Don't draw attention. Just blend in. As I merged onto the road, something shifted. The city lights reflected off the hood, the engine responded to the slightest touch, and for the first time in a long while, I felt elevated. Not happy. Not peaceful. Just bigger than I'd been before. That feeling, the one that told me I was finally winning, was the most dangerous part of the whole night. Once I was a few streets away, the fear started to loosen its grip. Not gone, just quieter, pushed to the back seat by something louder and more intoxicating. Confidence. The wrong kind. I remember laughing out loud, just once, this short, almost disbelieving sound. Not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe it was actually happening. Weeks of build-up, years of feeling like a nobody, and here I was, gliding through the city in something that turned heads without even trying. People looked. I could feel it. At stoplights, in storefront reflections, even in my peripheral vision. Every glance fed this ugly little voice in my head that said, "See? You're someone now." It's embarrassing to admit how much that mattered to me. I told myself I'd keep it short. Just a drive. Just enough to say I did it. That was the plan I clung to as justification, like restraint somehow made it noble. But the road opened up, and the car seemed to beg for more. The responsiveness, the way it hugged the asphalt, it felt like it was built for escape, for outrunning consequences. That's when the fantasies started creeping in. Not about selling it or cashing in, but about keeping it. About reinventing myself. I imagined a different life where this wasn't stolen, where I was the kind of guy who could afford things like this honestly. It was delusional, but in that moment, delusion felt good. Every mile I put between me and that garage made me feel safer, bolder. I stopped checking my mirrors as much. I started believing my own lies, that I was careful enough, smart enough, lucky enough to pull this off. That sense of being untouchable is a hell of a drug. And like most drugs, it works best right before it ruins you. The moment it started to go wrong was small. No sirens, no shouting. Just a glance in the rearview mirror and a feeling I couldn't shake. I noticed a car behind me that had been there too long. Same distance, same turns. I told myself I was paranoid, that this was just my nerves trying to ruin the high. Still, my hands tightened on the wheel. My heart rate spiked, and suddenly every move felt exaggerated. Was I driving too carefully? Too confident? I tried to act normal, which only made me feel less so. The joy drained out fast, replaced by that cold awareness that this wasn't a fantasy anymore. That's when I realized something important. The road didn't belong to me. I was just borrowing it, and time was running out. I made a couple of turns I didn't need to, just to test it. The car stayed with me. Not close enough to scream trouble, but close enough to feel intentional. My mouth went dry. Adrenaline flipped from fun to fear in seconds. I started running through excuses in my head, borrowed it, misunderstanding, wrong car, like cops ever buy that. I could feel the weight of every stupid choice pressing down on me. That's when the sirens came on. Blue and red lights filled the mirrors, and my stomach dropped. The king of the road fantasy evaporated instantly, replaced by one clear thought: you're screwed. I pulled over almost immediately. No chase, no movie moment. Just the quiet crunch of tires on gravel and my hands shaking as I killed the engine. The officer walked up slow, hand near his belt, flashlight cutting through the dark. I remember thinking how normal he looked, how unfair it felt that my life was imploding while his shift was probably just another night. He asked for license and registration. I stared at him for a second too long before admitting I didn't have the latter. Saying it out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. My voice cracked, and I hated myself for that. The car was still warm. So was the guilt. They didn't need long to figure it out. A few questions, a radio call, and the mood shifted. Polite but firm. The kind of calm that tells you the door has closed behind you. I stood on the side of the road, hands visible, feeling smaller by the second. Cars passed, headlights washing over me, and I wondered how many people could tell I'd just blown up my own life. I tried to explain myself, not to escape blame, but because silence felt unbearable. None of it mattered. The story was already written. The back of the cruiser smelled like plastic and old coffee. I stared at the cage between the seats and tried not to think about how final it felt. My adrenaline crashed hard. What was left was this hollow, buzzing shame. I replayed every step in my head, searching for the moment I should have walked away. There were dozens. I'd ignored all of them. As the city slid by outside the window, I realized the worst part wasn't getting caught. It was knowing I'd proven something ugly about myself. At the station, time slowed to a crawl. Paperwork, waiting, the hum of fluorescent lights. No drama, just the dull grind of consequences. Sitting there alone, the bravado finally died. There was no thrill left to cling to, no story where I came out clever or misunderstood. Just a middle-aged man who'd chased a feeling and caught a charge instead. That's when the guilt really settled in, heavy and unavoidable. Calling people was the worst part. Explaining why I wasn't coming home, why I needed help, why I'd done something so reckless. There's no good way to say, I thought stealing a car would fix how empty I felt. The disappointment in their voices hurt more than any lecture could have. I'd wanted to feel important for once, and instead I'd just become a problem everyone had to deal with. That realization stuck with me longer than the night in the cell. The days after were a blur of court dates, paperwork, and waiting. Waiting to hear what would happen, waiting to see how bad the damage really was. Every letter in the mail made my stomach tighten. Every unknown number on my phone felt like another shoe about to drop. What surprised me most was how ordinary everything looked from the outside. People still went to work. The sun still came up. Meanwhile, my sense of who I was had cracked. I wasn't some unlucky guy who made one bad call. I was someone who'd crossed the line knowingly and paid for it. That realization hurt more than the legal consequences. I had a lot of time to think, and that's dangerous when you're already prone to beating yourself up. I replayed that drive over and over, especially the moment where I felt invincible. I started to see how thin that feeling really was, how desperately I'd been chasing it. It wasn't about the car. It never was. It was about trying to outrun my own disappointment. By the time things were settled, I felt older than my years. Not wiser in a clean, inspirational way, just heavier, more aware of how easy it is to screw up your own life. I don't tell this story because I think it's impressive or edgy. I tell it because it stripped me of a lot of illusions. I stopped seeing myself as a victim of circumstances and started seeing myself as someone responsible for his choices, even the ugly ones. For a long time, I avoided mirrors. Not literally, but emotionally. I didn't want to look too closely at who I'd been that night. Eventually, I had to. Owning it didn't make it disappear, but it did stop it from owning me. I learned that adrenaline can feel like purpose if you're empty enough. That's a dangerous substitution. I also learned that being seen, even for the wrong reasons, can feel better than being ignored, and that's a trap a lot of us don't realize we're walking into. I'm quieter now. More cautious. Not because I'm afraid of getting caught again, but because I know how fast a moment of excitement can turn into years of regret. If there's anything I'd say to someone standing where I stood, it's this: listen to the hesitation. That voice isn't weakness, it's your last line of defense. The rush fades fast. The consequences don't. I thought stealing that car would make me feel powerful. All it really did was show me how fragile my sense of self was at the time. Power that comes from taking isn't power at all. It's just noise, and it leaves you emptier than before. I'm not proud of this story, but it's mine. And if telling it keeps even one person from mistaking desperation for destiny, then maybe it counts for something after all.